Oh, it's asking for permission to record.
Okay.
Did you did you receive the request?
Um, I received permission, and I think with the help of the divine powers that be, we are now on Facebook Live.
Ah, hello, Facebook Live.
Baruch haba b'shem Hashem. Welcome to welcome to this week's episode of a rabbi and a tattooed gay guru genius walk into a Zoom.
Aw,
It is my zchut and privilege to be here with my colleague and friend, new friend, Rabbi Igael, who is the founding CEO and rabbi of Tshuva Center. And he'll tell us more about that in a moment. I'm going to confirm that we're actually on Facebook Live. Oh yeah, I think we are on Facebook
good.
Live.
And you're recording this on your end?
I think it gets recorded automatically, like
Oh,
like when we post it on Facebook Live. But I'm gonna click record now, anyways,
yeah. That
just
were we.
just to be sure.
Okay.
Um, and I will try to check periodically to the comments in Facebook
Yeah. Probably should
Live,
listen to them.
so we can respond. But welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. Ooh, let me turn that off. Thank you, brother, too.
Where am I
The wonders
finding
of technology.
Where am I finding you tonight?
You are finding me home. I'm in New York City in Tribeca. Freedom Tower is watching over us.
Yeah.
So
Um,
you know, it's funny because I sometimes um, I wake up and if it's really cloudy like this morning because it's so high, we're very high in our building. The whole Freedom Tower is gone.
mm,
So I wake up and there's a second there that sort of I'm thinking like, oh, where am I? Because I can't see, I can't orient myself to freedom.
mm.
So, but then
I,
usually it burns off.
I love that. I think that's a feeling many of us probably can relate to, given these times. Um, so, for those who have no idea who you are, um, this is a very rather like strange episode of a rabbi and a tattooed gay guru genius walk into a Zoom. But I felt it was a fitting title for tonight's episode because I first learned about you and your holy work through a dear mutual friend, Rabbi Jeremy Borovitz of Base Berlin. Um, but maybe you can introduce us in your own words to this new project that you've undertaken in New York, and we'll go from there. Beseder?
Bestela Gamo. Uh, so yeah, I mean, thank you for having me. Right, I didn't say that, which is sort of like, right. Um, so yeah, what we're doing here in New York is bringing something that I've been involved with in LA for quite some time. Many people know of Bet Chuva, which is a addiction and recovery rehab center. But not just that; it's also a community and a spiritual center. And I was there for a while as the director of the spiritual director, the director of spiritual life, and um, coming to New York, sort of to really create a recovery spiritual community that's a residential recovery spiritual community that's designed to help people who are looking to find recovery from all sorts of different addiction, from
Mm,
addictions that we sort of like talk relatively freely now these days, right? So like opiates, alcohol, gambling, but addiction comes in many different forms and it can decimate us in many different forms. So sorry, that's not my. So it can decimate us in many different forms, and people don't really have a place to go and build their lives. People don't really have a place to actually learn how to live a life of recovery, right? It's one thing to be sober, it's one thing to, right, to be clean. It's a whole other way to live in recovery. And Harriet Rosetto talks a lot. She's the founder of Betshuva, but you don't have to be an addict to be in recovery.
mm,
And the Chuva Center seeks to create a home for those people who are looking at building their own lives. And it has to be said, I guess, and I think a lot of people agree, or hope so, addiction is a spiritual malady at its core. It starts with an eroded sense of self. It starts with a place that you say to yourself that I don't matter, that I don't have any value, that my life is worth less than others. And when that hits deep inside, it's really hard to not have maladjusted behavior like addiction, you
Mm.
know, and you lose track of it.
Mm.
Um,
So, so tell me, how did you get started with Beit Tshuva on the West Coast?
so it's a funny story because I was so I'm a Talmud teacher, right? My vocation is Talmud. That's most of my life. I'm a teacher, and I was teaching. I still teach the same class on Zoom before this whole thing. Like, I've been a super Zoom user for quite some time before COVID, which is a really odd sort of like feather to put in my cap. But so one day I was asked if I would teach a Talmud class at Bet Tshuva, and I really didn't know much about Bet Tshuva. This is many years ago, and I said, "Sure, right. I'll go teach Torah wherever I'm invited." I'm a student of Isaiah Leibovitz in Israel, and right, and he, right, great prophet and teacher that he was. If he was invited somewhere and was able to go, he would go no matter what. And I remember him, right? So like schlepping on buses to, like, from Jerusalem to Beersheba. He didn't drive because he was invited to teach at somebody's living room. And
Cool.
he didn't care if it was a conference like with the Pope or if it was somebody's living room. And I've always been inspired by that. And so I said, yes, of course, I'll go teach. And
What were you up to? What were you up to in life at the time? You were working stam as a Talmud.
Yeah, I was
You were a
working
rabbi.
stam as I was working stam as a Talmud teacher. And it's funny, at the time I was like, you know what? I don't want this Jewish world anymore.
Mm.
I went to a rabbinical school in Israel many years ago, and I was like, you know what? I don't want this. So I was doing like art, and I was working for Aldo and working for HGTV and doing a lot of creative project and being a creative director. And I was like, that's it. Like, it's my time now. I just moved the time from San Francisco after being the student dean there, and a Bible teacher and a Talmud teacher there. So I was like, that's it. I don't want anything Jewish anymore. I'm done with the Jewish world. Enough with this, you
Mm.
know. Uh, and so that's what I was doing. I was just teaching Talmud because I love Talmud, and I studied Talmud every day of my life since I was 5 years old. So so that, and then they asked me, and when I got there, I met somebody who I haven't seen in many, many, many years, who was one of my campers at camp many years ago, probably about 15 years prior to that, and reminded me of a conversation that I had with him when he was a teenager. And he
Mm.
said, Iggy, everything you said, check, 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 check. Everything you said to me that I should be warned, that I should worry about, check, check, check. So you were absolutely right. And I think about you almost every day, right? Unbeknownst to me.
Wow.
And he said, what would you think about doing some spiritual counseling? And I'm like, what the fuck is that? I'm like, what's spiritual counseling? It's sort of like, like I'm a Litvak, right? Like I come from a long family of Litvaks. Like it's sort of like, I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox community in Belgium, like, right? Like we spoke Yiddish. It was like, spiritual counseling, yeah, get over it, right? So like eat something and get over it is pretty much spiritual counseling. It was part of my household, right? Or if you can relate, I know it's not funny, you were talking about Survivor, right? My
Yeah.
grandparents were survivors, and every time there was a slight complaint, they would be like, you think your boots are too heavy. Let me tell you, I would have killed to have boots. Right? Sort of like all that. So, right. So that's the household I grew up with. And so I didn't know what spiritual counseling was. And he said, I want you to have those kind of conversations.
Mm.
And I was like, sure. And the more I worked, the more I realized that this is the most significant work I've ever done in my life, and taking all my experiences, all my Jewishness, all my Talmud, all my rebellion. I was a very angry kid, and mostly all my otherness, right? So like you very kindly said, right? So like the tattooed gay guru rabbi, whatever, right? But my otherness is the thing that's really is at the core of a lot of my experiences.
Mm.
And I realized that we all feel the same way, and that people who are in recovery, people who are falling into addiction, are just in a very extreme version of it. And I
Mm.
could relate. I saw the humanity in them. And and the fact that people were rejecting them, the fact that people were not talking about it, the fact people still don't talk about it, right? The Shonda factor. I can't tell
Mhm.
you how many people I've worked with, people from our own community, right, who have been shunned, who've been thrown out to LA because, right, not right, sort of as my grandfather would say, like nicht von unseren, right? This is not
Yeah,
our work, right? This is
yeah.
not, we don't do that, right? Jews don't drink, Jews don't beat their wives, Jews don't do drugs, Jews don't have AIDS, Jews don't steal, Jews are not in prison.
Mm.
So the more of work I've done, the more I realize, like, oh, this is us. And and be able to connect and to stop referring and stop working with people role to soul, but
Mm.
soul to soul,
Mhm. Mhm.
and seeing people's soul, um, is the most profound thing that for me, in terms of our work and in terms of my personal ability to help people.
Mm. Such a like profound like metamorphosis, you know, and like story of becoming. I want to go back though to like that 5-year-old boy who was like learning Talmud. What was life like for you growing up? Where tell us a little bit more about what your childhood milieu was.
Right. So I guess I'll tell you two sort of parts of it. The first part, and you will relate, right? For people who, right, who grew up like us, right? So like there's the boys and the girls, and they're separate, and it's a whole separate thing, and that's how it works, right? So I remember the moment, it was a little older, when one of my friends asked the rabbi, is like, why do we not, why are the girls not here, why would I pray with the girls, why they're behind the mechitza, right, behind the barrier? And the rabbi saying, oh, that's because we don't want to be distracted during tefillah. And I remember thinking, like, distracted, what what's distracting, like, what is he talking about, like, what? And I remember that was the first and real moment. It was like, oh, I don't think that that's the same as everybody else, because up until that moment I thought that that's what the boys are with the boys and the
Right.
girls are with the girls, right? It's sort of like this Jewish Trojan army kind of a thing, right? So at that moment I didn't realize, of course, that that was the moment that I realized, of course, that up until then it was like, there's something different.
Right.
But I will say that, as
Hmm.
as a 5-year-old boy or whatever, when I was studying Talmud, um, I always asked all the questions that nobody wanted me to
Mm.
ask.
Mm.
And I was beat, I was ridiculed, I was sent to God knows where. I had to memorize chapters of Tanakh. I, right, from corporal punishment to physical emotional punishment,
Mm.
which part of it sort of now I will admit sort of like is part of my canon, right? Sort of like, because I don't know, but like people like me amar me, right? Who said to who, which is these,
Yeah.
like, I'll give you a quote, and you have to tell me who said who. Like now I'm like, I'm champion, right? but
Mm.
but at the time it felt very, because
Mm.
these right, these kashas, so I kept thinking, because, and I didn't realize at the time that it was coming from. um, at the beginning was very naive, and then later on I realized that sort of it's going to annoy people, and unfortunately, of course, I have that personality. So I was like, how about what you
Mhm.
said last week?
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
So and you're fit. Take us from point A to like point Z. Like,
Right.
where does that questioning, like, a tormented Talmud student go from Belgium?
So I would bounce around a lot, and there's all sorts of different mentors in my life who were able to see beyond my stubbornness and beyond my rebelliousness. I don't think that's a word, rebellion, whatever.
Yeah.
um One of them was Rabbi Neria from far away from Yeshivat Bnei Akiva, right? Sort of that was one of the rabbis there, who constantly would push me to say like, but what is at the core of the question? Why are you asking? What is the thing? And he wasn't afraid of me. Um, although he did say at the end, it's like, if only you believed, if only you were a true believer, and what he meant, if only you believe the way I believe, right? He was like, I would make you a great rabbi. Like, okay, thanks.
Right.
But eventually, where it led me is to really look at the world through a lens of what can I learn, right? That the speaking of Isaiah Lebovich, he once said to me, he said, and at the time I thought it was a great insult, but he said, your questions are far better than your answers. It was one of the things he had was a question. I said like, oh, I know the answer, and I wanted to say the answer, and he was like, your questions are much better. At the time I was very insulted. I thought like that was horrible, but of course it was later on that I realized it was great. It was a great a great compliment. But still to this day, right, I can't, and this is part of the work, I can't leave well enough alone. I can't, I could be a Talmud teacher somewhere, I could teach, I could even like write a couple books and whatever, but like, what about all the people that don't have that opportunity? What about the people in our community around us who are suffering, who are dying, literally dying, because they don't have anybody to ask the real questions, right? You do very similar work, right? So like, how many conversations we are able to create for people to say like, what do you really want to ask me? Because the thing that really matters to us, right? Love, God, my meaning, purpose, sex, money, power, those are the things that we've made taboo.
Right.
Those are the things that really make real conversations, right? Talking about love, right? And right, your courageous work with sort of right LGBT and right and all that sort of, which is amazing. How many times we've sequestered those who think we do not deserve the kind of relationship that we others have.
Yeah.
Because we're afraid of what it would say about us.
Yeah. There's this obsession right now that's going on in popular culture, on Netflix, right? Of like, in the Haredi community, particularly, right? In the ultra-Orthodox communities, with One of Us, a documentary about leaving, or Unorthodox. And it dawns on me that they're like, this is the real Unorthodox right now, like hearing your words, and I'm curious, like, of the work that you did at Beit Shuvah, now that you're doing here. I think whoever we are, we have a sense that it's like, it's not ours, right? It's like, it's there, it's in that community, or it's that family, or it's that, and I'm wondering if you share a little bit about like the people who, you mentioned the camper, but I'm wondering if you'd share a little bit about the people who have colored your life in this work, who you've gotten a chance to work with, whose souls you've gotten a chance to touch. Where are they coming from?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Yes, I mean, the real Unorthodox, or the right, or Shtisel, right, sort of, right, which is kind of closer to where my family is, right? You've seen the whole series,
yeah.
Right. So no spoilers, but like, right, if you've seen there's the Belgian branch,
yes,
right there. So that's us. That's us, and right, and like you, like a lot of people who grew up in the same thing, right? So like, you may not know, right, these people, but like, I know every single one of them, right? I know, like, I don't know that guy, but I know every single one of them. I always recall. So when somebody came into Beit Shuvah, right, my job was to assign a spiritual counselor to them, right? So everybody who comes in at Beit Shuvah, like at the Shuvah Center, gets a core recovery team that consists of a counselor, almost like a case manager, a therapist, and a spiritual counselor, right? And as a team, sort of, we both meet and work to make sure that each program is individualized so that people can actually um, grow and work together with every part of the team. So A, they don't hide, but two, that we can really sort of unearth together the core of the addiction, right? To go back to that spiritual malady, to go back to that hole in your soul, right? And fill it with spiritual matter, because you try to fill it with alcohol or drugs, right? And it doesn't work, it gets bigger. And hence, here you are at the rehab. So I would assign people. So right, and in general, right, my job was to make sure that the sort of the spiritual well-being of the people was sort of taken care of. And so in this guy comes into my office, and I tell you, Avra, he's the guy that all our grandmothers warned us about. This is, and I'm not kidding, this is a double murder, right? Lifer, murder as a juvenile, comes in, I think he was like 17 years or 19 years later, 6 foot whatever, like mountain of a man, African American, like huge t-shirt, like walks into my office, right? I mean, I'm not a slight person, but like that's not like, so right, and you walk in, and he walks in, and I look at him, and I think about, okay, what am I going to do? Because I don't know, I don't know what to do, because I'm thinking, how do I assign somebody to him? And should I worry of my safety? He just came out of prison, and all these thoughts go into my head, and I look at him, and I look straight into his eyes, and all I could see is a scared boy. All I could see is a guy who just came from a really organized state, right? A prison where everything was rules, and he doesn't know what to do, who to talk to. And here he is sitting in front of a white male authority figure, rabbi, and he was petrified.
Mm.
And I remember in that moment sort of thinking like that no matter what he's done, no matter who he is, no matter who he becomes, I could never not see that guy.
Mm.
When you look somebody in the eye, when you really are authentically looking soul to soul, everything else melts away. Right. And how it was profound for me.
Mm.
Because all of a sudden I was like, oh, it doesn't really, not it doesn't matter, but like, here's a guy that just is just a man, just like me, who has the same fears as me. He might have different experiences, but as a person, as part of the
Sure.
human condition, I can talk to him, right? Just like anybody else.
Mm.
And how the labels and everything around, I know it's such a cliche, but the labels we put on people and on experiences becomes obscuring our ability to connect.
Mm.
And fundamentally, right, the opposite of addiction, this is Johan Hari, right, the opposite of addiction is not recovery, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I remember this. I remember a story. I'm trying to, I forget. Like, I think it might be a story of Shlomo Kalbach, who are in that aura or genre of like rabbis who would go into communities that weren't necessarily their own, and to sort of talk about like the stuff that no one there really wanted to talk about. And being ridiculed or ostracized because of it, but afterwards, being approached and thanked, for just naming that very thing that like so many of us experience or carry, but are petrified of just acknowledging that's there. And so there's something about in your in this story you share of this man who looks and sounds and and whose like DNA feels so different that is actually so similar. That's I think very very humbling for us, for me. Um, why do you think it's so hard for people to I don't know, sit in that space of a shared otherness or soul to soul encounter?
I think I think we're so used to self-soothe with these distractions, right? And again, for some it's drugs and alcohol, it's like, but some it's shopping, eating, right? Right, food. Like how many right? Like I'm guilty of that thing, right? Like right, I'm gonna come out of this pandemic like with the COVID-19. I mean, it's clear, right? But right, but right, it's interesting, right? So you go by the fridge, right? Because you think you're hungry, right? There's something here. But if you ask yourself, what are you actually feeling?
Mm,
If
mm,
you're honest with yourself, and so like when you're feeling, you'll be like, oh, I'm not hungry. I'm anxious. I'm afraid. I'm stressed. Whatever it is, and then no matter what, even if you take the bar of chocolate or whatever it is from the fridge, that's not going to go away. And then, so, but right, but a lot of us eat it. And then what happens? And then you're like, oh, I
mm-hmm,
shouldn't have done that.
mm-hmm.
And the shame and the guilt, right? This is like right, so if you're like a small, if you're, but the shame and the guilt of looking at people's and looking at other people who've made mistakes, perhaps bigger than ourselves, remind us of our own. And we don't want to sit with that discomfort. We don't want to look at other people because it takes away from our own sort of like, oh, I don't, what about me? And it's hard because it's intense. It really is intense, right? Because then every time afterwards somebody says like, how's it going? It's going okay. Like you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And yet, though, it's like it's it's only like should it, it's only like it only serves to like hurt ourselves, right? To avoid that, like I'm thinking about like because you started mentioning this idea of like a shanda, shanda for the goy, like things that like we 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 don't talk about, or we hide or shy away from. And then on the other hand, we have this like concept of like that we like should never feel that sense of like of despair or shame or embarrassment. um and I guess I'm wondering like how do you go from one place to the other, if for
I
the
think,
addict and the non-addict?
right, of course. I think that unfortunately, right, we live in the Western world. And I think that sort of we are influenced by the Western world of what we think is proper. And I also think that, as a minority, as a community who grew up with a lot of persecution in general, we try to sort of keep everything sort of under a certain cloak, right, under certain wraps to be okay, right, to not show fear, to not show weakness, not show vulnerability, right. A lot of us think vulnerability is weakness,
Right.
right, which it isn't. So we hide it because we don't want to admit that, right, our son, our daughter can't cope, can't deal, has a mental issue, right? So in my community, that is, and I know it's so okay, but like in my community, that means it's sort of like if there's like divorce or whatever, or part of my family who doesn't speak to me because I'm gay, because if they admit it, right, the shidduchs, right, the right, the marriage, right, arrangements for my cousins and stuff will be harmed, and that's still a true thing, right. And I whatever, I mean, I think it's idiotic, but
Yeah.
that's their world, right. I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So we're afraid of it because what does this say about me?
Hmm.
And you said before about the callback, right? So like when I first started doing the work with my new team here, right, I'll do a presentation, and then I sit wherever I presented, I just sit, I wait. And a lot of my team, I had a previous person who was running some of the itinerary. He's like, okay, let's go. We have the next thing. And I was like, no, let's wait a few minutes. He's like, come on, Iggy, we need to go. Like, we have to be in Long Island and whatever. And I'm like, no, let's wait a few minutes. And every single time the room clears, and then in walks in the mother, the father, the thing. Hey, I want to talk to you, my son, my daughter, my, like, every single time.
Mm.
And that's this in the same way that so people, it's hard for people to admit that. It's hard for people to do that. And part of my job is to float it and be the bad guy. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm going to say something very unpopular, I guess. I think so in my thing, but like, there are things that I learned from Jacob Frank, the vilified, horrific, right, sort of like second false messiah, right? The cause of Hasidut and Hitnagdut, if you will, where he was like, hey, if you want to sin, don't hide it, sin in public, right? And I'm a bit inspired by that, because that's true. Like, let's talk about it.
Mm.
What are we? Who are we hiding this from?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
who, right? So like, who are we like, who's gonna really judge you if you find, which is part of our way, if you find self-worth in yourself, whose judgment do you care about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I even had a conversation like this with my mother when I was in, like, right, who, like, right, Hana Tirza, right? So like, right, like, who cares what she says?
Mm.
Right? Right? Menachem Mendel, right? Of every Chabad family, like, I don't care what you think about me.
Mm.
But a lot of people do, and they're afraid of that, and they don't want to bring it out.
I think about, on Yom Kippur night, on Kol Nidre night, on like Banu litpalel im kol ha'avaryanim, right? This phrase that we say,
Absolutely.
we've come
Oh
to
my
pray
God.
with all the
Delinquent.
trespassers, right? The sinners. Who are we talking? Who are we talking to? Who are we talking about? Yeah,
Us. And
yeah.
and and you're absolutely right. It's exactly thing. It's sort of like, because the truth is, right? And I say, like, the only way to make real tshuva, and not to do tshuva before Yom Kippur, living tshuva, is to realize that we are all avaryanim. Right? Rabbi Cook says, right, that tshuva was built with the creation of the world so that nobody could say, I don't sin.
Mm.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
you say, I don't sin, you are negating what God intended in the world.
Mm. Mm.
Right? And we constantly try and push people to, like, be good, do good, be good. Yes, that's important. But what happens when you're bad?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? What happens when you're not that good? Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who wants to work for me, I always ask him, like, right, so like, what happens when you're angry? What's the
Mm.
darker side of you? And you say, if you say I don't have one, I'm not hiring you, because you're not honest.
Right, right. Um, I love this Torah of a Torah of tshuva and a Torah of vulnerability, and I'm wondering if you take us now a little bit into like let's imagine pre Corona days, but into like what your work is now looking like, tachlis, some of the practical pieces of it, and how and where this Torah like lives in that work.
Um, so there are multiple things, but
Because
primarily it's built, right?
that I was gonna say, because like you're like you're in the ground too, right? Like
Right.
you're
Oh
in,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So share it
mostly.
with us.
Mostly. Yeah, so primarily we're building, this is before Corona, we're building an actual physical center where people are going to live, right? So we're going
Yeah.
to be up to 50 people at the beginning who are going to live and be part of, like, these are the people who really need day-to-day support, right? We're doing a lot of spiritual counseling with them and in general. We're also creating community, right? So we did pop-up Shabbats before we started, but like a space where people can come and be together and daven, right? If the opposite of addiction is connection, connection is through community, both for people who graduate from the program and people who want to, and their families, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to be connected in a way, and we have to, in that sense, creating a space for people to daven with their recovery. If you want to go, let's say
Mm-hmm.
you're going want to go to AA. Almost every AA meeting in Manhattan is in a church, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
cross on the wall. So if you're Jewish, right, you have to negotiate with that. Why? Why do I have to choose between my Jewishness and my recovery? And when I want to daven on Friday nights, right, enough of just hearing about, right, sort of like, Moshe who got into MIT, or right, Daphne who just had a baby. That's great. But what about, right, what about Iggy who, or not me, whatever, like, but let's say, what about Iggy, right, who wants to celebrate a year sobriety, right? What about Avram who wants to say like, hey, I'm taking a chip for 90 days, right? Like, what about those accomplishments? What about taking a cake, right, for those things? And so we're building a community like that, right? And around that, there's a lot of sort of education and a lot of things that sort of revolve around sort of like creating awareness, working with synagogues, working with rabbis, working with families. We do a lot of spiritual counseling one-on-one. We're creating a lot of spaces for people to engage in sort of sober activities, a lot of family education we're going to do and doing already. But primarily, we are there to be the catch of people who need help, right? So that when you've tried a lot of other programs, many times sort of we're the last house on the block. That is sort of like when people come to us and be like, we've tried the 30 days, the 60 days, the whatever, now what? And our work is really, at the end of the day, is about the people and creating a space for the people to really be able to grow their soul, to find a place. We often talk about at the Tshuva Center. I don't want you to fit in. I don't care about fitting in. Fitting in means that somehow you have to enlarge or contract yourself somehow. Tshuva Center, like Bet Tshuva, is a place where you belong, just as you are. And whether you've used drug once, or whether you've stolen or lied or cheated, or even, as I said, or even, right, so were convicted of murder and want a place to make tshuva, we're that place. If tshuva is really important in our tradition, which it is, right, and tshuva, right, for people, right, it means both return, response, and repent. Come to us. I will not judge you, right? I'm, like you said, I'm a gay immigrant tattooed rabbi who has a foul mouth, right, to adopted children, right, who right, who lives in a 700 square foot house. I mean, like, honestly, right, sort of like I've done things that like really, it's part of like base after dark, but like, but so we have to be able to be, as we said, honest and open. And so the work on the ground is talking to families, talking to communities, talking to rabbis, talking to synagogues, to invite me to, like, to say like, hey, here I am. This is happening. And if we're not talking about it, people will die.
Right. I think that's the piece that like we like to leave out, right? That we forget this is actually a matter of like life and death for so many.
Right.
Pikuach nefesh.
Absolutely.
So, and I feel bad. We have to give a plug. We have to say like the name of a website or something already, just at least once in the course of the Zoom call. What is it?
Right. So you could go to chuvacenter.com.
Okay.
Chuvacenter.org. Sorry, just .org, whatever either actually works. But chuvacenter.org is where we are. But I have a podcast called Tattoos and Torah. So people can listen to that. It's on Apple and Spotify and everything. Our Instagram, which is sort of the place where, right, we seem to be most active, Chuva Center. That's our handle. So all these places are really places that people can connect, and either just say hi and hashtag sort of whatever, or people just say I need help. And either we can offer it or move them to, or try and help them sort of move somewhere, or direct them somewhere to have help, or just support, right? Both organizations, right, rely on the support of people and families, of people saying like, Giving Tuesday now was just yesterday, so right, everybody still is looking. And these are all times, and my concern and my fear, by the way, right, is that the loneliness and isolation and anxiety everyone's feeling right now is gonna um, aggregate and exaggerate what we're going to see when we're coming out of this, right? So
Yeah.
I get annoyed a little bit about everybody showing their day drinking as if it's some kind of trophy these days,
Mm.
right? So like, oh, quarantini, oh look, drink it for. I don't like. Yay,
Yeah.
you're a budding alcoholic. Hooray for you.
Yeah.
Um, right, sort of. But you know,
I was gonna ask you. I was gonna say, like, what, given where we are right now. I was just reading an article in the Times, and I heard also on NPR of like what it's like for the rooms, right? The AA and all these other rooms to now meet virtually, right? Because connection, that is such a like life force for so many. I was gonna say, like, what's your sense or feeling about how this current pandemic is going to affect um, affect
so yeah.
Shuba Center and affect like our communities going forward.
Well, first of all, I think when we can get out, I think people are so craving human contact.
Yeah.
Everything will be flooded. But I think, one of the great things about one of the gifts of this is that sort of the everything is virtual, so people can join from everywhere,
Right.
right? Right, and we run a couple of meetings. We run a meeting on Wednesday. We run a meeting on Sunday with Jax. We run a Tshuva group. By the way, if people are interested of how to live Tshuva, we do run a Tshuva group at 92nd Street Y, which is now on Zoom,
Mm.
on Thursday at 5:30, right? And that's a great tool, and it's designed for everybody, right? Right, you don't have to be an addict to be in recovery. That's always true. Um, so right, so a lot of it is on Zoom, and for some that's really easy. For some it's hard, for some it's very difficult to do that. But I
Yeah.
would say, funny enough, of course, uh, we have one client um, who says I can go to meetings now and I don't have to sort of like pretend or lie to my wife or whatever of like, hey, I'm going at 8 to meet whatever Yankov or like right, so they can go to their bedroom or whatever or
Yeah.
the basement and go to a meeting. So this is also a chance for people who perhaps before were afraid to go into a room or didn't know how to walk into a church basement or how to find room. This is a great way to sort of tip your toe in and sort of like and say, hey, I'm so and so and this is what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think we're gonna have a big surge after this, and we're gonna have to figure out how to, as always, sort of make sure that our communities is healthy, right?
Iggy, thank you so much for your like presence and your humor and your vulnerability and honesty and your work, which is mamash saving lives. It's no small thing. And so New York, the whole East Coast is great. On behalf of on behalf of all of East Coast and the New York Jewish community and all the people who don't want to hear from you or welcome you, I want to welcome you with such open hearts and say just how much your work is needed here.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, and I guess just to be clear, right? So like that, whoever listens to us now or whoever this recording, like whether you are Jewish or not Jewish, whether you are a man of faith or not, whether you are gay, straight, trans, or any other variation of the rainbow, whether you are in between all these or not, if you are suffering, if you're in pain, there are people here for you. And Avram, I'm definitely volunteering you, but I'm definitely volunteering me. There are people who are willing to listen and to say to people that no matter what, just because you were born, that you matter and you have value. And everything else falls from there. And you don't have to prove it to anybody. So just as an open invitation to anybody that sort of needs a little extra help and support, we're here for you.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. To be continued, my friend.
Indeed, 100%.
Okay. Shalom, shalom.
Bye.
Bye.